Good morning to everyone. I think I've got all my various technology things in place. We'll be starting in just a minute. Just give it another minute for people to log in through YouTube or Zoom. Okay, I think we've got our usual folks coming in. So let's go ahead and get our discussion underway. So one of the most famous and confusing episodes in this entire section of the Torah is the story of the golden calf. It is iconic in the sense that everybody has seen the pictures or movies or read the versions of it, but it is also incredibly confusing of exactly what's going on and why it was undertaken. It is understood by our sages and scholars throughout the centuries as having lasting impact on the nature of Jewish belief and the nature of Jewish connection to God. But it's unclear, from a quick reading of what's actually happening if we are being honest with ourselves. So I'd like you to forget any movie depictions you've seen. I'd like you to forget any preconceived notions. I'd like you to look at the text with clear eyes and as though you were a completely new reader. And remember, of course, that in the reading of the Torah, you are never meant to be a passive reader. You are meant to take in the text that is there, as well as to understand the text that is not there, to ask questions, to hypothesize answers, to believe that the text is hinting at more than it would be said to be revealing if it were written by a modern author. But of course, the Torah was not written by a modern author, and even more importantly, it wasn't written for a modern audience. So with that in mind, let's undertake the discussion of the golden calf episode. Whoop, excuse me, just some people waiting to get in, and let me get them through the waiting room. All right, so we are going to hit then chapter 32. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, the people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god, who shall go before us. For that man Moses, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." All right, so first of all, obviously the Torah is assuming in chapter 32 that we have some context. What we do know prior to this is that Moses had gone up to the mountain, having been summoned by God. This was taking place after the theophany, after the great revelation of God's presence to the nation at Mount Sinai. And we know that Moses has been up there for some time, 40 days, and it seems that the people have grown impatient, are concerned, are worried, that they are now looking for what? Well, the English translation makes it easy, right? Please make for us a god. Great. Except the word that is used for God is the word Elohim. Now, Elohim can mean three different things in classical Hebrew. It can mean capital God, Elohim, as the name that stands in for God, God's self. synonymous in many passages with Adonai in many respects. Or Elohim can mean lowercase g, gods, as a plural collective noun for all of the various gods of the ancient world, or some of the gods of the ancient world. So already we could see that the people are asking for God, meaning capital G, the actual God who brought them out of Egypt, or we could be seeing that they are asking for pagan gods to guide them at this point. Complicating the factor is the fact that in the verb that goes along with this verse is the phrase yelchu. Now, yelchu is a plural verb, so that would seem to indicate that the noun must have been plural. Now, what is that third option that the Elohim could be? Well, Elohim, as we'll review in some of the commentaries, is often used in biblical Hebrew to mean simply powers, like the high and mighty, the powers that be. And as such, it can often be used as a term simply for humans. To make this verse even more complicated, and I hope you're getting good and confused because that means you're open for looking at this in new ways, it says specifically that Moses the man, right, Moshe Ha'ish, which is an odd way of emphasizing his identity, that brought us up out of the land of Egypt is not here. So what are they looking for? Are they looking for somebody to lead? Are they looking for somebody to take Moses's place? Are they looking for something to take Moses's place? And why do they want this at all? Because after all, they don't know what happened to him. So their request in the text is very ambiguous. It is very difficult to nail down with a degree of certainty that could make you stand up and say, I know exactly what they want. They want a big, shiny cow so that they can pray to it. That is not exactly...
Rabbi?
Yes. Yes.
Where are the pillar of fire and the cloud at this point?
You mean, are they still present or not?
Yeah.
So that is not explained anywhere in the text. We know that the pillar of fire and cloud would guide them. We know that also the cloud seemed to hover over them as a sukkah, as a shelter, but we don't have any clear explanation of where that other physical experience of God's presence is at this time. But certainly whatever it is they're looking for seems to be in addition to that. And it's revolving clearly around Moses, perhaps also around Moses's humanity, perhaps also around the fact that they are looking for someone that will lead, or looking for some things that will lead. It's simply not as clear-cut as many of the more simple interpretations make it out to be. It gets even more complicated when we look at Aaron's response. Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So he asked them to donate gold jewelry. And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. This he took from them and cast in a mold, and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." All right. This is perhaps what you might say a leap of logic. The people ask for an Elohim. We're just going to use that as a generic word at the moment, as a title for their request. Aaron decides to ask for gold. The people provide the gold. He takes it and seems to fashion it into this Egel HaZahav, this golden calf, this golden form of a cow. And then the people say, "This is your God," right? And again, it's the phrase Elohecha is that plural form, which could mean God, capital G. It could mean lowercase God, but then why is it in the plural? Or it could mean powerful and powers that be, or the high and mighty, in which case, why is it a cow? It's very, very strange. as is the title that is given to it at the end, which is, "This is what brought you out of Egypt." How can they possibly say this is what led us out of Egypt when it hasn't been there until today? The cow was not there talking to Pharaoh. The cow was not there at the parting of the sea. The cow was not there taking them to Mount Sinai or feeding them manna. So it's a very confusing thing. Is this meant to be a replacement for Adonai, the actual capital G God? Is this meant to be a symbol for God? Is this meant to be a symbol of a different God? Or is this meant to be simply a standard that is a sign of themselves, of the power that led them out in a more ambiguous and amorphous way, rather than anything else, much like an eagle on the top of a standard of Rome, or other symbols that go along with marching armies? It's just simply a mascot, perhaps. It's very, very confusing. And if you don't think it's confusing, you're not reading it carefully enough. Verse 5. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of the Lord." First time in this whole discussion where we actually see God's name, Adonai, Yud He Vav He. So Aaron sees this. What did he see? Did he see their declaration? Did he see their acceptance? Did he see their willingness to go along with this? What did he see? Did he see their potential for violence? It's unclear. And so he built an altar and then announced tomorrow, why not today, but tomorrow is going to be a festival for Adonai. Again, not 100% sure what Aaron is trying to accomplish here. Moving on to verse 6, early the next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink and then rose to dance. Now, this idea of dancing and having fun, of having a festival, certainly that makes sense. If this is representing the power that led them out of Egypt, then of course they are rejoicing, just as they did when they were at the seaside of Yam Suf. Questions up to this point before we see the response afterwards? All right, so we're going to see that we're going to skip the section specifically where Moses is talking with God about this. God is basically saying the people are making a huge mistake. I told them not to do this. I'm going to wipe them out. And Moses says, don't do it. Because if you do it, everyone's going to say that you only brought the Israelites out into the desert to die. So he says, just wait. And indeed, Moses goes back down. He meets up with Joshua. And then we see his response when he reaches the actual camp, picking up in verse 19. As soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged. And he hurled the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it. He ground it to powder and strewed it upon the water, and so made the Israelites drink it. All right. The smashing of the tablets, is this anger? Why is he smashing the tablets? I mean, after all, he knew what was going on when he had a conversation with God just moments before. Why would he feel the need to smash them at this point? We're not actually going to go into much detail on that. We've talked about it in the past, and there's many midrashim about it. Suffice to say for today that the sages often applaud him for doing this, not out of anger, but out of compassion for the Israelites, in a way almost trying to erase the contract that they were violating in order to mitigate the crime they were committing. Additionally, the grinding up of the golden calf, putting it in the water and making them drink it, a very odd parallel that might be in connection to the waters of Sota, taken from the book of Numbers for checking for suspected adultery. And certainly idolatry is considered to be a form of a spiritual adultery, violating and betraying the trust that God has given us. But of course, drinking powdered gold and water, while not exactly something that a person should do on a regular basis, is not actually deadly. something you shouldn't do at all in any large quantity, but there are many restaurants around the world, not that I could afford to go to, and probably not that are kosher, where you can eat gold in many different forms. So this is not really a poisonous thing, and nor should it be, because after all, Moses has already defended the people of Israel against God and is clearly not trying to harm them. Moses then turns to Aaron. Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them?" Aaron said, "Let not my Lord be enraged. You know that this people is bent on evil." All right, Aaron is not exactly sticking up for the nation. "They said to me, 'Make us a god to lead us.' For that man Moses, who brought us from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him. So I said to them, 'Whoever has gold, take it off.' They gave it to me, and I hurled it into the fire, and out came this calf." Midrash rightly points out that Aaron's retelling is distancing himself from many of the events. It's almost like the calf came out spontaneously from the fire rather than being crafted. Moses saw that the people were out of control, since Aaron had let them get out of control, so that they were a menace to any who might oppose them. Moses stood up in the gate of the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come here." And all the Levites rallied to him. He said, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, each of you put sword on thigh, go back and forth from the gate to gate throughout the camp, and slay brother, neighbor, and kin." The Levites did as Moses had bidden, and some 3,000 of the people fell that day. And Moses said, "Dedicate yourselves to the Lord of this day, for each of you has been against son and brother, that he may bestow a blessing upon you today." A lot happening here at the end, too much for us to possibly get into, but a couple things that are important to note. One, the Levites seem to have remained loyal and dedicated. And two, even though the Levites are going to slay brother, neighbor, and kin, which sounds like it is a wholesale slaughter, out of the total number of people there, we see 3,000 being killed. We know, at least with regards to the surface numbers, that there may have been 600,000 or more people. 3,000 out of 600,000 is a tiny, tiny fraction of the number of people who would have been involved. We're looking at like 1 out of 200 that might have actually participated in this. So how were they identified as being the true participants? Many commentators point to the gold water that they would have drunk, that somehow that would have marked them as people who participated more enthusiastically or in a way that was actually prohibited, a way that was actually idolatrous. This then, of course, means that we're going to have to ask, was there a way that the others were participating that perhaps was not as wrong, that was not as evil as these 3,000 that were actually executed at this time? And then, of course, very importantly, the Levites who supported Moses are not exactly criticized, but are definitely held to some account that they were willing to attack against their fellows, and that they need to be dedicated to God in some way in order to receive a blessing. Now, it may be that this is a reward for their willingness to do this. It may also be a criticism that they were keen. Indeed, we know that Levi, along with Shimon, was famous for his tendency to violence. And this may be a reminder that Levi is allowed to do violence, but only in a way that is dedicated to God. And thus, it is not surprising that they eventually become the guardians of the Mishkan and the temple. All right, before we dive back into what were the Israelites thinking, how could they have done this? And is there any possible way to read their actions in a slightly more noble light, even while admitting that they made a mistake, and in order to understand why only 3,000 out of the hundreds of thousands were actually punished, and what we can then glean from that. So with that aside, because that's going to be our main focus in the commentaries, are there other questions? All righty then. Let's go ahead and dive into our commentary. And of course, you can always bring up other questions as we go on. Okay, so What were they asking for with that word Elohim? We need to get a handle on it if we're going to understand any of this. Of course, there are multiple interpretations. We have Rashi, based upon the word based upon Sanhedrin, who argues they wish to have many gods, right? Straight idolatry. They wanted idols, they wanted gods, plural, pagan activity. They were rejecting God altogether. The word Elohim is to be taken as plural, since the verb shall go, as we pointed out, the Yelhu is also in the plural. So Rashi, taking from one of the opinions of the Talmud, says that this was straight up idolatry. They wanted gods, they got at least one god, they probably wanted to make more, and therefore everything they were doing is one of the worst crimes that a person can possibly commit. All right, now, there's a few problems with this. One of the problems, of course, is that it doesn't explain why they emphasized this is the God that brought us up out of the land of Egypt. It doesn't explain why they focused on the concept of Moses, or Moses being an Ish, being a human. It doesn't explain how Aaron could go along with what they were doing at all, nor how Aaron could dedicate the festival to Adonai if what they were trying to do was make pagan gods. But this is an official and acceptable version. It's just not the only way to understand it. Tiskuni offers us an alternative. Right? Who shall go before us? And again, that shall go, the Yelhu, is in a plural form. In using the plural mode, they mistakenly made Aaron a partner of God, assuming that he was experienced in performing miracles as had been Moses, and remembering that Aaron had actually orchestrated a number of the miracles involving the 10 plagues. So Tiskuni says, when they were looking for who will go before us, they were assuming that God was still going before them. That's one part of the plural, but they want the other part of the plural. And the other part of the plural would be Aaron, that they are asking Aaron to be Moses's replacement. And as he points out, that's pretty logical. Aaron had been there for many of the miracles. Aaron had certainly even seemed to perform many of the miracles. So why not have him take over? And then there would still be a plural. There would still be at least two to go in front to lead the nation. That they were looking for a leader. They were looking to Aaron. They wanted him to partner with God and pick up Moses's place. Tiskuni is arguing for what I would call the minimalist position of their crime, which is that they weren't rejecting God. They weren't rejecting Moses. They weren't looking for idolatry. They just wanted a new leader because it looked like Moses was gone. And they turned to Aaron, who had already established himself as a leader, who had already established himself as somebody with whom God could do miracles, as the natural replacement. John?
That ties in with Exodus 7 when the Lord says to Moses, "See, I have made you like a god to Pharaoh." God in that sense is different than
Indeed.
an idol.
And we're going to come back to that Exodus 7 quote a little bit later on, because indeed that phrase Elohim, which is used in that word as well, or used in that verse as well, is also in plural, and yet it's talking about Moses in the singular. So perhaps Elohim doesn't need to be plural, although again, at least in our verse here in Exodus for the golden calf incident, the verb that goes with it is plural. It's confusing, but it does definitely make sense that Aaron, having had that official position, would be the likely candidate to replace Moses. Hakatav v'Hakabbalah gives a slightly different view of this. Again, going back to the phrase that will lead us. They did not deny God's existence, right? This is still plural. They're still looking for somebody to lead. They're not saying that God can't lead. They merely wanted a visible image in addition. That is why Aaron did not consider it necessary to risk his life by opposing them. So what this interpreter is saying is that Aaron was looking at the people who were becoming agitated and who seemed to be leaning towards potential violence. Indeed, there are commentators that say that they had already killed one person, Hur, and that they were threatening Aaron as well. And he's like, well, look, they're not actually denying God. They just want a visual representation. And Moses had been their visual representation, and now they want a different one. I'll give them one. I'll give them one that, they'll still see as God, meaning the true God, but this way I can placate them without actually getting murdered by the mob. So it's not that it was a good idea, but it wasn't such a horrible cardinal sin of Judaism, idolatrous idea either. It is sort of in between. So we have three different views. Yes?
That goes to my first question, which was, where is the pillar of fire and the cloud? Because if those had gone with Moses up the mountain for Moses's conversation with God, then the people would have been left without that visible, the visible presence.
Well, the cloud in general would have been around the mountain, but the question is whether that now seemed like just a cloud on the mountain or whether it was still felt as being that leading presence. But they certainly wanted something more tangible. And that's really been the draw to idolatry for time immemorial, from time immemorial, which is people want something tangible. It is easier to mentally connect to, even though it comes with all of the mistakes that idolatry brings. So we have Rashi, who is the maximalist, saying they were absolute idolatrous sinners, full stop. We have Hiskuni, who is the minimalist. We said, no, they just wanted another leader, and Aaron was the guy they approached. And then we have to figure out why Aaron did what he did. And then we have Katav HaKabbalah, who's saying it was a mix. They weren't denying God. They weren't full-on idol worshipers, but they did want a physical representation, and that is actually prohibited. However, in the face of a mob, Aaron chose to placate them rather than sacrifice his life. All right, so to go further, we're going to pick up with Hiskuni's line of argument that this is sort of a minimalist. They weren't really asking for the worst of the worst. They are just asking for help in figuring out who's going to be the leader in the next step. So, according to the plain meaning of the text, there can be no question that Aaron had no intention to allow the people to revert to idolatry, God forbid, or somehow to replace God or his prophet. Now, anytime an author says no question, no intention, usually that means other people have questioned it, and there might be some hints that there were that intention. However, he is going to argue that that is not the case. Moses, he argues, while on earth, had frequently been referred to as Elohim, either when compared to the creature issuing commands in the name of God to Pharaoh, or as communicating God's law to the people. So Moses, as we've already referred to back in Exodus 7, has been called Elohim. So looking for a replacement Elohim, a replacement Moses, seems perfectly fine. And that probably is what Aaron was considering, says Hiskuni. If Aaron had intended to become the replacement of his brother Moses, if that had been his intention, to actually go through and become a replacement, Moses would have had to execute him as a false prophet. And yet we see when Moses comes down, although he doesn't seem happy with Aaron for what's happened, he does not execute him as a false prophet, even though we know that somebody claiming to speak on behalf of God certainly would be a false prophet if they were truly believing that that's what they were doing. There can therefore be no question that what the people demanded of Aaron was not a return to idolatry. They therefore requested from Aaron that he make for them a replacement whose function would be similar to what had been Moses's function. And what was that function? God had performed so many miracles which had been orchestrated by Moses that they had been quite prepared to prostrate themselves before such a leader. So Hiskuni is continuing his idea here that what the people really wanted was a replacement Moses. And they probably were looking to Aaron directly to do that, but Aaron is sort of refusing to be that replacement, because to do so would be to make himself a false prophet and thus open to execution when Moses returns, as well as having violated what God has asked. So Aaron is now considering alternatives. And alternatives are hard. as we're going to see in Hiskuni's continued explanation of the difficult position that Aaron was in. We can form an idea of the urgency and haste and confused thinking that dominated the people's mind at that time. The people were agitated, they were scared, they were unsure of which way to go. Remember, they had been led out of Egypt almost as a child by their parents' hand. So it's not surprising that when that symbol of the guidance, Moses, is gone, they are becoming confused and panicked. Aaron thought that if he were to suggest any one of the leaders of the people to take the place of Moses, right, just pick one of the other tribal leaders. Such a person would not be willing to give up his promotion on the following day when Moses would return, and this would result in dissension and possible civil war. Very astutely, he's saying, look, what are Aaron's alternatives? They want a leader. I can pick a guy. Right? We've got leaders. We've got leaders from among the tribes. I can pick one of them and appoint them as leader of the nation. But when Moses gets back, and at this point Aaron did think Moses would come back, what's going to happen? Is that guy going to step down? Once power of leadership, once that full autocracy has been established, is this person going to back away from having that power? Maybe, but we know from later on in episodes in the Torah that many of the other people within the tribes were only too happy to challenge Moses and Aaron for leadership, and only too happy to foment rebellion and potential civil war. So Aaron knew that he couldn't just pick somebody to replace him. On the other hand, if he were not to appear to comply with the people's wishes by doing nothing, meaning he said, you know what, I don't think that's right, I'm not going to help you, they would choose someone. Meaning if he's not going to pick a person, they'll pick a person, which would lead to immediate dissension among the people. If you just let the mob pick a leader, then part of the mob is going to pick a person that part likes, and the other part of the mob is going to be unhappy with that pick. And now you've got the dissension and potentially civil war immediately, whether Moses shows up or not, because you've already had a person appointed in a way that is going to anger a huge percentage of the nation. If he were to accept himself that he should take over Moses's position, which might have seemed logical, Moses would find this difficult to accept on his return. Right? Aaron knows that taking over the leadership mantle, even if he would argue that it was meant to be temporary just to keep them past this crisis, Moses is not going to be happy with this. And as we saw in his previous comment, it could even lead to his execution. He therefore decided to play for time. Smart guy. So that no action would be taken pending Moses's return on the next day, which is what he expected. So he is still thinking Moses will be back tomorrow. The problem would therefore resolve itself without any revolutionary changes having been taken. By suggesting that these people bring him jewelry from their wives, he thought he could gain enough time. So Hiskuni really views Aaron as simply playing for time, as not giving into the mob and letting them choose a new leader, but instead deliberately picking something that will be the replacement that is going to take time to build, provide the materials and build, and then create the festival. He is hoping and that he can stretch out this process of replacing Moses as long as possible, so that when Moses gets back, there will have been no major changes that will lead to catastrophe. All right. What do we think of Hiskuni's argument? Is he letting Aaron off too easy? Is he letting the nation off too easy? After all, he's basically saying that the nation didn't really ask for an idol. They just asked for a Moses replacement. And Aaron didn't really want to give them an idol, but he thought it would be even worse to start a civil war. So really, they were all just trying to make the best of a terrible situation, right? We can have a little bit of sympathy for them. Definitely, I think we should have some sympathy. Yes, Natan.
I'm sorry, I thought that you did an open question.
It is, yes, it is meant to be a question.
What do we think about that? Okay, I don't know. Sometimes I don't know if it's a rhetorical open. It's funny. Yesterday, actually, I was hearing a podcast and Vartora about this, and the position was exactly a Hasidic position. It's like Aaron was okay. Of course, he's a Hasidic person. Okay, so he has the spill from a Hasidic spill, but he said that Aaron was a tzaddik, and he said, okay, when basing in.
Oh, we lost Natan. Natan, we lost you there for a second. You back? Hello? Hello?
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you, yes.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Yeah. So the perspective was that very similar, that he was a tzaddik, and basic in Shabbat and in Ruvim, the Talmud say that if you know someone else will do a very terrible sin and you can prevent it, it's better that you do some small sin in order to prevent something bigger from someone else. So that's why Aaron was buying time and doing the pesel, doing the golden calf, in order to try to get.
And he disappeared again. Wow. We're having some bad internet connections today. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I have one too, but it's in Tales of the Hasidim by Buber. Sometimes you need to get a little muddy to help other people out of the mud. So Aaron is in his great kindness. He is stooping really to prevent a greater harm, seeing that the people.
Now we lost John. This is crazy. All right, so I think
thank you, Sean. That was exactly that. That was exactly the position. Okay, thank you, Sean. I have a problem here in connection, but yeah, that's what the issue that basing in the Masechet Shabbat and Eruv, that you need to try to avoid someone else making a bigger so that's why you prevent them making you a little uncomfortable position, or doing something that you know that is
doing something that you know isn't right. We're going to just wrap it up because we're really playing with connection now. And indeed, that is borne out. This line of thinking is supported by the fact that only 3,000 people were killed in retaliation for what had happened, meaning that the vast majority of the nation does not seem to have worshipped that idol as a god, but instead looked at it as some sort of symbolic image of a leadership that wasn't deified in their heart and in their mind. Okay, so we're going to move on, and I'm going to try and figure out if there's something wrong on my end for the internet, or whether it's other people that are just not having a good internet day today. But let's move on to see how some other ways to look at this time from Or HaChaim. But of course, he begins by quoting Ramban, which is my way of sneaking in more commentary, but not taking up more space. Ramban writes that the Israelites did not demand or expect Aaron to make idolatrous images for them, as the people most certainly believed in a living God who had taken them out of Egypt, and who had performed all the miracles for them, which the Torah had recorded. It is clear that the Israelites did not for a moment believe that Moses had performed all these miracles on his own. This is why, when referring to Moses, they described him as someone who had led them, walked in front of us, or indeed an ish, an actual human being. So he begins by this quote from Ramban, or paraphrase of Ramban, that the people weren't asking for an idol because they framed it as being comparable to Moses, and Moses was walking in front of us. Is a very human phrase, and he's even called a human very explicitly in that passage. So then what were they actually looking for? Seeing that apparently Moses would not return from the mountain, because how long can a person be up there? They asked for a substitute who, with the guidance of God, would henceforth be their guide through the desert, still to be traversed before they would come to the land of Canaan. They did not refer to a power which would enable men to live in this world or in the world to come. They're not talking about a divine entity. They're not looking for something that will lead them ba'olam hazeh and ba'olam haba, in this world or the next world. They were looking for a very practical, physical kind of guide. They were fully aware that all the journeys thus far had been at the command of God, transmitted by Moses. The famous line, as we see from the Song of the Sea. All they expected of the substitute was that it walk in front of us. When they referred to Moses having raised us up from the land of Egypt, this is not to be confused with who has taken us out of Egypt. Right? The one who lifted us from Egypt is different grammatically than the one who took us from Egypt. The first being Moses, he was the one who was walking in front. The second being God, that was the one who orchestrated everything that happened. If Moses were to return unexpectedly, the people were most certainly prepared to accept his continued leadership, as they proved when no one opposed either Moses' burning of the golden calf or the measures he introduced to punish the few people who actually did dance around the calf and revered it as a deity. If the people had really believed that this calf possessed any divine powers, they most certainly would have protested Moses destroying their deity. So Torah Aruch, sorry, I misspoke about who this was quoted from, is saying, look, from all the different points in the narrative, we can work backwards and see that the people did not consider the golden calf to be a god. Yes, some might have. That's our 3,000, unfortunately. But like I said, that's 1 out of 200 at least, if not even smaller percentage of the total population who participated in this activity. The vast majority were just looking for some kind of substitute that would be as a symbol going in front of them. And yes, as John's mentioned, we could still wonder what happened to the pillars, but as I pointed out, they might just have settled on the mountain. The people might have considered those to be uniquely attached to Moses. For whatever reason, they are not looking at those as being what will take them to the next step. They wanted something, and Aaron gave them something that seemed to satisfy the majority of them, and unfortunately moved some of them into the wrong step of idolatry, but avoided the worst issues of civil war that might have broken out if they hadn't felt that they had anything to guide them. Let me just get the next comment loaded up as we bring this to its conclusion, and then we can continue to discuss. The word before us, right, that this is walking in front of us, was chosen very carefully. They reasoned as follows. Seeing that God himself, who has taken us out of Egypt, is invisible and dwells in the celestial regions, they were afraid that if they would encounter some evil force in the desert without some visible symbol which reassured them that God did indeed watch over them, they might lose faith. So let's just take that and try and unravel it. The idea being that they knew there was a God, but they also can't see God. And they know that God is in the heavenly realms beyond human contact in that tangible way, and certainly beyond any visible presence on earth in a tangible way. So they're looking for reassurance. They're looking for a symbol that God is indeed still watching over them. We know that even prior to this, when they are fighting the Amalekites, that it's Moses' hands being held up that seems to inspire the people to be able to win their battles. So they seem to be heavily dependent upon that presence of God in as tangible a way as possible for them to continue to have faith that God is indeed there with them. And that desperate need seems to be what led them to do what they did. They wished to construct some symbol of a celestial force which would remind them of God in heaven. The people who initiated the golden calf did not deny for a single moment either the primacy of God or the fact that he had made heaven and earth. They merely wanted a go-between between them and God. They may well have thought that the prohibition in the second commandment to having an intermediary between man and God was valid only while there was a Moses who was the ideal go-between. So they sort of reinterpreted the second commandment against having idols as being, as long as you had something better, you shouldn't do this. But if you don't have anything, then obviously you need something. That was their mistaken interpretation. They meant to say that even when they came out of Egypt, God had employed a go-between, and that this proved that there was nothing inherently wrong in having a go-between themselves and God. The fact that they referred to the go-between as Elohim, deity, may be understood in the same sense as when God had told Moses in Exodus 7, "Here I have made you Elohim for Pharaoh." Obviously, the people committed a grave error. So the issue here at our final analysis is that the people rightly recognized that Moses was a go-between, partly because they themselves made him such when they told him at Mount Sinai, "You go and talk to God because we're afraid," and partly also because it was Moses that brought the promise of redemption and helped be the manifest tool in which the miracles of the 10 plagues and the parting of the sea were performed. So it might be natural that they would think go-betweens are actually okay. Here we've got Moses, now we don't, here we need something else. Unfortunately, that is a big problem. So the question then becomes, if our commentators seem to be lining up, apart from the outlier of Rashi, to say that really what they were asking for was quite understandable and maybe not even idolatrous in the fullest sense of the word, and maybe only a few really did approach it with that level of idolatrous passion, maybe we should not be so hard on them. But if that's the case, then why do we still say they made such a grave error? Why has our tradition continued to point to this generation as one of the worst? Why do we lambast them at every opportunity for this incredible sin? Well, there's lots of different opportunities to analyze this, but I'd like to just offer one possible interpretation. It's that when people feel they need a physical reminder so desperately in order to feel God's presence, that they are most vulnerable to having that physical reminder become a perversion of God's actual direction. That when people are desperate enough to latch onto anything as being a symbol of God, even a shining cow, that they are most likely to mistake which direction they actually need to go. God had given them what they needed. Even if Moses had not returned, they should have been able to guide themselves using what God had already revealed to them and working together as a nation. But they were insecure. They were simply afraid. They did not believe in themselves enough, and they did not believe that God cared enough to stay with them without some constant physical reminder. And that is a very sad, but very dangerous place to be. Because for a person who is that afraid, a person who is that insecure, a person who is that desperate for some symbol that will make them feel like God cares about them, even when God has already provided so much and is continuing not only wherever the presence of the clouds may be, but providing water and providing manna, showing that there is an ongoing support and care for this nation, needing an additional physical reminder, whether it be a special person or whether it be a special object, is simply sad and prone to danger. Because if you cannot recognize that God cares in all of the thousands of small acts around you, then you're not actually recognizing what God wants in the world, which is the thousands of small acts of kindness and justice and goodness. If you think everything has to be one giant shining example, rather than 1,000 small acts of what Torah has given us, then you're missing the point and you're missing what God wants from the world. And that means that that shining replacement is definitely going to lead you in the wrong direction. God is not looking for grand gestures. God is looking for a consistently good life. And we should not be looking for grand gestures from God. We should be appreciating the thousands of ways that God helps us in each of the minute details of life. And now, give or take various internet problems that people are having, I'll open the floor for additional comments and discussion.
Question.
Yes.
I think of this in contrast with the bronze staff.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Very
one
much
is
the, yeah.
Could you address that?
Yes. So I don't want to risk your internet dropping out too much, but so the bronze serpent, the bronze staff, was used as a symbol later on when there was a plague afflicting the Israelites during the desert, as a way of directing the people's attention towards God in order to help facilitate the healing. However, later on, during the time of Hezekiah, the bronze staff had become its own idolatrous symbol, and people worshipped it as its own unique power. And so it had to be destroyed at that point. So symbols can be great as a way of directing passion and inspiring people and of galvanizing resolve and trust. But they are incredibly dangerous, and far more powerful seems to be the idea of the symbols that we should encounter on a daily, frequent basis, just by noticing the blessings that are around us, rather than hoping for something that's big and grand. All right, so I'm going to be giving my internet a little bit of a review, make sure it's not a problem on my Zoom end, and see whether or not there's anything I can do to improve it. I thank everybody for their patience in working through our discussion, give or take the connection problems. Hopefully everything will be straightened out before our class tonight and tomorrow. Tonight, Mishnah at 7, and tomorrow at 6 p.m. for the Pathway to Judaism class. Take care, everyone, and be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.